Welcome once again, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, one and all, to a brand new edition of The Quinn Spinn. I'm your host, The Quinn. At least that's how I'm known here on the program. And I'm back here on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and more for another rousing and riveting and very educational installment of the official podcast of Underground Music Collective. You just heard Revel 9's All I've Become at the top of the show. That's been our opening theme song here at the Quinn Spinn since the great year of 2014, and it will be until the very end of days. And this is a very special episode because I am joined by not one, not two, not three, not four, but 5 students in the Morehead-Cain Scholarship Program from UNC Chapel Hill. So thank you all for joining. Of course, they are doing a study on the creator economy and its impacts on creatives here in Nashville. So first of all, thank you for the important work you're doing. This is going to be a very enlightening discussion, I'm sure, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
So the 3 standard questions I ask every guest of the show, we'll start with you, sir, and we'll go down the line. Feel free to answer these however you want. Have a little fun with it. Who are you? What are your passions, and why on earth would you want to come on the Quinn Spinn?
Absolutely. My name is Jey Sedam. At UNC, I study biochemistry and Spanish on the pre-med track, all of which I'm very passionate about. I also am really into long-distance running. And why on earth would I want to come on the Quinn Spinn? I think that learning more, delving more into our project, it's just such an interesting topic, which we can go into later. And coming on to the podcast has just been a really amazing way to increase the visibility of the work that we're doing here in Nashville.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. My name's Benji Garland. My passions, well, I'm an AB PR major at UNC, but I'm also a musician and a rugby player. And I think coming on the Quinn Spinn, similar, just increasing visibility and just giving us another avenue to kind of let people know what we're working on and why that type of work is important. Because if we've heard one thing across a bunch of people that we've interviewed, it's that a lot of people feel the same way. It just takes kind of a combination of all those voices at once to make some real change happen. So we're excited to be here. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. My name's Marli English. I'm passionate about cooking. I'm a public policy and philosophy major. I would say I'm passionate about that. I really love ethics. And why on earth would I want to go on the Quinn Spinn? I'll second what they said about visibility, but it's also my dream to be on a podcast, so I can now take this off my bucket list. I would add that is one of my passions as well.
Dreams coming true. Dreams coming true today. I love it.
My name is Chandler Beals, and I am passionate about public service. My mom is a public school teacher, and then my dad growing up was involved in school board and a lot of different boards in my community. So I kind of grew up just in that environment and in the space that community was really important. So that's something that's been instilled in me. And then besides that, I also really enjoy writing just about life and what I see. And I am glad to be on the Quinn Spinn. I think you do a really good job getting to know the motivations behind the people who are doing work in this community. So it's really cool to be able to share our motivations for this project.
Yeah, I'm Addison Truzy. I'm a political science and advertising and PR double major at UNC. And I would say I'm very passionate about law, policy, those type of things. So being able to research and work with the chamber this summer has been amazing. I joke with Marli, I have the same thing about always wanting to be on a podcast. So this is really cool for me. But also, I think that this is a great opportunity to showcase what we're doing in Nashville and also shed light on the amazing work the creators have done. I think that supporting them has been amazing so far.
Well, thank you for being here, rather. I'm glad to have you is what I'm trying to say. And I'm glad to make dreams come true here by having you on the podcast. And so whoever wants to go first, give us a little bit of background about the project, about the Morehead-Cain program, and how you all came together here in Nashville, and why Nashville, and what about the creative ecosystem made you want to work on this project? That's a lot of questions, I know.
I could start with just what Morehead-Cain is, and then we could break this up however we want to. But so we're all rising sophomores at UNC Chapel Hill in the Morehead-Cain scholarship program. And basically, it's a merit scholarship. It's nomination based for the most part. So a lot of schools in North Carolina nominate like candidates for it, and schools outside of North Carolina, there's how many nominating schools? I don't know, a lot of them around across the nation, who nominate a student every year to be considered for the scholarship. And then there's also admissions referral scholars who are picked out by our UNC admissions office to be candidates for the scholarship. So we all arrived in-state, out-of-state admissions referral, different paths to get the scholarship. And then the Civic Collab Summer is part of the Morehead-Cain program, where you are grouped up with 4 different people in your scholar class and placed in a city and paired up with an organization. So in our case, it's the Nashville Chamber, and given a dilemma that you kind of grapple with. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the growth of our city too, brings with it a lot of opportunity, but a lot of challenges for the creative class as far as, rising cost of living. Rents are going up, of course, groceries with inflation, that kind of thing. So how much of that is informing the work that you do right now?
I can kind of speak. I think that the reason that they chose to investigate the creative class, like the impact of the cost of living on the creative class in Nashville specifically, is that Nashville has such a unique history with the arts and music. And I think Nashville is kind of at that point right now where the cost of living is rising. A lot of people are moving to Nashville. And it's a critical moment for Nashville to either choose to preserve that history and culture and really find ways to support the creative class in the face of the cost of living, or to continue like the trend that New York and LA kind of have followed, where the creatives are being pushed out of the city and the culture kind of dissipates a bit. So I think like right now, Nashville is a very important place to investigate the creative class specifically because of that point in time that Nashville's at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. As far as the chamber support, because you're working closely with the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce on this project, what has it been like to work with the chamber? What kind of insights are you getting from the folks there?
Yeah, it's been absolutely amazing to work with the chamber. The chamber hosts us, and part of like the civic collaboration summer is the host kind of like apply to be hosts. And so going in, we had like a really great infrastructure of support, especially with Stephanie Coleman at the chamber. Mm-hmm. She had so many contacts for us. And since the chamber has so many member organizations, you sort of have like, they have like a sign on their wall of so many organizations that we could just pull from, mm-hmm. thinking about who would be helpful to talk to with our project. And since, you get a chamber email, you kind of already have credibility working with the chamber, and they're mm-hmm. already a member organization. And so it's been incredible working with them.
Mm-hmm.
They've also got such a great research team that's been giving us a lot of like information, which there's just a lot of other places that you could land, like Marli said, like with the credibility, but also just the wealth of knowledge that they already have built up. Like it's their full-time, like there are people working at the chamber whose full-time job is to investigate certain like economic trends or population trends and like know policy like the back of their hand. So it's been really helpful being able to just tie up any like loose ends on the knowledge side with like professionals that work there if we have questions about policy or like questions about certain trends that are 10 years ago and certain different things like that. So it's been really great having the research team and policy teams there to work with us.
Mm-hmm. And so you have all been going around the city, talking to different people, different organizations, really getting a feel for the creative ecosystem here in Nashville. What are some of your takeaways from that? And is there anything that surprised you from meeting with different people, uncovering different organizations, that kind of thing?
I think one of the biggest things that surprised me, at least, was, I guess, the lack of specific support for the creative class. There's been a lot of initiatives like with housing for creatives and finding ways to fund organizations that help the creatives here. I think the most surprising part was like the lack of direct support for those. And I think that's why our dilemma is so pressing, because of the fact that the creatives are the ones that are upholding like the culture of Nashville and why people want to come here in the first place. So I think that figuring out ways in which that we can find ways to support creatives in all different areas, whether that be through funding or that be through the housing sector or that be through just displaying what they are doing in the community every day.
What would you say the general temperature is among creatives as far as their sense of optimism or pessimism about the future?
I've gotten a sort of mixed sense, and I think like
Yeah.
anyone can add is like some creatives feel, I think, positively, negatively about what's going on with the rising cost of living, of course, but they feel this kind of sense of optimism or maybe security in the community that already exists here. I think something that surprised me was how many just incubator spaces there are. Like the space we're in, we've been to the Forge, and like I was completely unaware of how many spaces there were that just like foster community between creatives. And so I think that having those spaces and having community gives people a sense of security, but then there's also the pessimism of like, you know, who's making sure that these spaces are upheld other than us? And so eventually it's like, not just pessimism, but kind of just this awareness of like, if something doesn't change, I just can't afford to live here. So a mixed sense, I think.
Yeah, and kind of to add to that, I think we've kind of recognized that a lot of creatives are feeling less and less valued in the city of Nashville. And it's kind of, music and arts will always still be here, but it's kind of the shift towards come and party with us and be in Nashville for the music party scene rather than kind of the raw culture that like places like the Bluebird Cafe with the songwriters brings to Nashville. And as like venues, maybe not the Bluebird specifically, but smaller venues like the Bluebird are being pushed out of Nashville, that culture is definitely shifting, and the like, I don't know, the uniqueness of the arts and music scene in Nashville is shifting towards more tourism based. If that makes sense.
I also feel like we've kind of gotten that like mixed bag because it's one of those things that's so like it's so prevalent in the creative community, like all of the like economic challenges that the creative community is facing. Like it's so prevalent that it's almost like kind of depends on like the day that you catch somebody. Like everyone kind of has those two sides of them, that like one of them is like one day I think a creative in Nashville could easily justify just packing up and moving out of here, and then the next day they remember like the community that they have at a place like H.O.M.E or like a place like the Forge, or even just on a certain road in East Nashville where they've had neighbors for years. Like there's that kind of, there's those two sides that I think are constantly, I think that the economics of Nashville have pushed people into a space where they're constantly just pushing and pulling with like the realistic opportunities that are here versus like the fact that they have a good community here and like kind of sense of belonging here. So yeah, I think that's why we get like some people, we might catch them on a good day when we're interviewing them and they're willing to talk about all the optimistic stuff, and then some people, we're interviewing them literally in the middle of their day where they're racing between this and that, and that's when you can catch people kind of in that overwhelmed, like just you see the hustle and like you see the work and how much these people are trying to hold on in the interviews. So
for sure, it definitely is, I think, a mixed bag in this city as far as, you know, just culturally. You know, there are two Nashvilles that I've observed, right? And I've lived here since the end of 2018. There's the come party with us Nashville, you know, the tourism, Broadway. I call that the Nash Vegas Embassy. That's not really Nashville. And then there's the rest of Nashville, which is the people who live here, who work here, who are trying to build here. And these two things, so often, you know, sometimes they intersect, but so often they find themselves at odds because of the cultural differences within them and because of the different parts, the starkly different parts of Nashville that they represent. And I think when people come here, they might come here with one impression and leave with a completely different impression of what Nashville actually is. So I want to go down the line. We'll start all the way down at that end and then work our way down here. Is there something that, you know, you learned about Nashville that maybe you didn't expect upon coming here and having been here for a while?
I would say I didn't expect to know how much of the arts there is in Nashville. I think that kind of goes with like the branding that Nashville has, like Music City. But then you go around and you like visit different places and you realize how many other art sectors there are, and like also how vast like the term creatives is. Like it could be down to marketing, designers, it can be cooks, like chefs. It could, you know, it's a wide range. So I think that it was really amazing to be able to see the different art sectors that are here in Nashville and getting to appreciate those individually along with the music and the CMAs and those type of things.
One thing I love about Nashville is you can just feel that the creatives are here somehow. like just walking down the street or interacting with the community members. And it's not something that I expected to feel so greatly whenever I got here. I knew that it was the Music City and there's a lot of art here, but yeah, it's just something in the air in Nashville. So that's been really cool.
Yeah, I didn't expect Nashville to be so like diverse in neighborhood. Like I also didn't expect it to be so new. My dad's from here.
Mhm.
He grew up in Rutherford County, or like between Davidson and Rutherford.
Mhm.
And I'd visited when I was younger, and maybe it's because I was younger, and I think I only went from like his mom's house to White Castle, and maybe that didn't have a lot of variety. But just the difference between like East Nashville and Germantown, and then Green Hills, and then thinking about kind of when you expand out to like Murfreesboro, Smyrna, Hermitage, everything's so different, and there's so many different kind of like ways of life between neighborhoods and different cultures between neighborhoods that I'd never really seen before. And like, of course, different cities have like different districts, but this was something new. And even seeing with the growth and with the newness, the willingness to kind of want to like maintain the integrity of those different pockets was like really unexpected for me. It was really awesome to see.
I think one of the things that surprised me so much is just we got our like civic collaboration summer assignments, like where we were going to be a few months before we ended up coming. And obviously I'm telling my family and my friends that I'm going to be in Nashville, and it's almost comical coming here and kind of diving into the city. It's almost comical to kind of compare my real view of the city versus what everyone says when you say, oh, I'm going to end up in Nashville. They're like, oh my gosh, I went there for a weekend. Like, you walk down the street, every place is absolutely jam-packed, and they're playing music, and like there's like 5-level bars, and everyone's telling you about this like insane image that is just Broadway. And it's so much more nuanced and so much more intimate, I guess, when you actually like get your feet on the ground and you're going from neighborhood to neighborhood, like Marli was saying, or even just a couple streets off of that Nash Vegas embassy, like you said, like you called it. But I think I don't know, it's just there's such like a genuine expression that exists here that doesn't exist in other places that I think a lot of people miss in that basic description of like, oh, I'm gonna be in Nashville, and people say, oh my gosh, you're gonna have a blast on Broadway kind of thing. Right. Whereas like when I'm living in Nashville for the summer, and we all are, and I think when you live somewhere and commit to actually getting to know it, it's 10 times better than anyone described, but in a totally different way, in just more of like an intimate and like genuine way, I think.
To piggyback on that real quick, I had a similar experience when I was getting ready to move here too, because everyone's like, I hope you like country music. And there's so much more here than country music.
Exactly. That's the same thing.
You know, to the outside world, that might be what we're known for. But like, I'll tell people, I was just in Atlanta this past weekend as of recording, and I'll tell people Nashville has a really good hip hop scene, and people look at me like, what? And I'm like, yeah, like it's there. Like there's a really good thriving community that flies under the radar because of the association people have with country music, but it's here, you know, and everything's here. So, you know, just to echo that point. And I just had to jump in there because that reminded me of like when I was getting ready to move here, and the idea people had of what I was stepping into ended up being completely different from what it is. Yeah. And now we move to you, sir.
I think one of the things that surprised me the most about Nashville was just how nice people were. Coming into our project, I think I was a little bit worried about having to meet with such important people within the community, and thought that it was almost going to be a challenge having to pull them away from their schedule to meet with 5 college students. And I feel like we've seen the opposite. Like there's so many more people that want to meet with us than we have time to meet with them. And we've just had artists who have been so willing to show us like their creative spaces. Like we were able to see the artist in residence program at Downtown Presbyterian Church, and so many just different community stakeholders within like the affordable housing sector of Nashville. Just all different facets have been so willing to meet with us. And just everyone on the streets is so nice.
Yeah. We do have a very good like pay it forward culture here, you know, and that was another thing when I moved here. Like I was surprised by how easy it was to meet people and how willing they were to like take you under their wing and show you the ropes around here. And then what you learn over time is like, you know, as you become the not so new person anymore, you then fall into that role too. It's really, it's embedded in our culture. I think it's part Southern hospitality, but I think it's also like there is that community feel that you might not get in New York or in LA. We're not as big as those cities, and therefore, between that and the creative nuances of this ecosystem, there is this sense of togetherness that comes with that, and the sense of wanting to grow together, help each other. Rising tide raises all boats. So yeah, good point, because that's exactly what I noticed when I moved here too, is like people are just willing to help you, and that's something that maybe you don't get in a larger city. So another question for the group, and we'll start here and go down now. So going back to this idea of direct support, what is one thing that you think the city, the ecosystem surrounding creatives could do to support artists better than it is right now?
I think one of the things we've noticed so far in conducting our research and interviews is there's a pretty big gap between creative advocacy groups and the policymakers of Nashville. Coming into Nashville, I was almost surprised to see how much work was being done to kind of bring light to their plight, in the sense that, it is Music City.
Right.
And without the creatives, it's not going to be Music City if they all keep getting driven out. So I just think that seeing that gap has been really surprising. And I think one of the things that we're trying to work towards is how do we bridge that gap? Because I think in a little bit they're coming out with the Nashville Music Census, which is going to hold a lot of data.
Right.
And I think we're just trying to work on how do we give those people an opportunity to speak directly with policymakers and have an influence on the policy that's coming out of the city of Nashville and also the state of Tennessee.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. I also think an issue that we've seen is that there is a lot of there's a lot of focus on pushing for more like government funding and more like government support, and I think it's one of those things that we are definitely not like discounting in our kind of like, I don't know, package of solution proposals or whatever we're gonna call those, because we don't want to act like we're fixing the whole problem. But it's definitely not, pushing for more government support and funding is not something that we've taken out of the cards. But I think something that is missing is a direct avenue to tap into the private sector for funds and for advocacy and for visibility, because it's become pretty obvious that it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of work and a lot of chance almost for us to rely on the government for arts funding solely. And what we've kind of realized is that there isn't necessarily a highly visible avenue for people who live in Nashville, who truly are just patrons of the arts, to directly fund the muralist that wants to do their first like multi-$1,000 project, or the artist who is working on getting funds to record their first record. Like those projects that get people off the ground, a lot of that has been, people rely on Metro Arts for that type of funding. And I think it's time that we also set up a second avenue to allow for people who love art in Nashville and want it to stay in Nashville to give to those people.
Yeah, I think something that the city needs to do, that decision makers need to do, is see creatives for more than what or who they bring in, and as like an integral part of the city, that you cannot have Nashville, you can't have culture without them. I think that, like Benji was saying, there's kind of like this sort of game you have to play between like a sort of more like conceptual lens of making sure they feel valued, and then like an actual like, policies. I think that if you go on like visit Nashville's website and you click arts, I can't remember the exact verbiage, but it's like, we have a ever-growing arts community. It's like, no, you have an arts community that's kind of central to who you are. And I think, yeah, just not instrumentalizing artists, giving them direct funding. There's no direct funding. Nashville spends a fifth of what most of their peer cities spend, a fifth per person than Charlotte. And I mean,
that's alarming considering we are Nashville. We are Music City. Wow.
Charlotte's Bank of America city.
Right.
And they're spending $20 per person on arts, and Nashville's spending $4.15. And I think artists know it's deplorable, but I think it's time for cities, for Nashville to know that you're kind of like, I don't know how to say it. You're shooting yourself in the foot.
And flying in the face of what you're supposed to be about.
Exactly.
And it's not just Charlotte either.
Yeah, it's not just
It's
Charlotte
a lot
either.
of peer cities that are like just running laps around the numbers that Nashville is investing into their creative class.
That is alarming.
When you
Wow.
like are hurting the creatives, you're hurting yourself, you're hurting the city. And I think it's time to see it as like an ecosystem where when you take, a keystone species out, everything gets hurt, not just like us versus them. It's truly an us. Yeah.
Kind of back to what Marli was saying, but just recognizing that the art scene and the music scene is what is making Nashville what it is, and just making it easier for artists to get their work out there. We talked about like the idea of a mural campaign, or just different ways that the city can support artists and make it easier for them to get their start with their work.
Yeah, and kind of feeding off of back to what Jay was saying about that gap between the creatives and the policymakers, I think it's also important to emphasize the need for the creatives to be heard when they're saying these things. Like, there's a lot of initiatives that have been brought to the table. We cannot deny that. Like the Ryman Lofts, for instance, like that was a great way to help the creatives and provide them basically workforce housing that they can continue to cultivate and use for their endeavors. But I think that it's the idea of hearing what the creatives truly need and applying that to whatever needs to be done. I think that's like a huge thing that they want. They want to not only be like, they not only want to talk to people, but also be heard and taken into consideration when they're moving towards different policies.
So that's a great jumping off point to my next question. And of course, here at the Quinn Spinn and Underground Music Collective, we like encouraging artists to think like entrepreneurs. We're big on the artistpreneur train. And so with that comes a level of autonomy and self-advocacy. So and we'll start down there again and work our way back toward me. What can artists do to be their own best advocates? What can they do to make some noise and bring these issues to light themselves?
Well, I would say that's actually a really great question. I would say working together. I think there's a lot of community already established, and there's a lot of artists and a lot of organizations, nonprofits that are working to be incubators for these businesses and these creatives. But I think that, like we were talking about, the idea of like bridging the gap between like the policymakers and creatives, there needs to be some form of like unity between the creatives in all sectors to be able to advocate for each other. And I think that also would help with like the way that Nashville is branded with Music City. If you include all of the arts, it can be so much more powerful and make so much more change. So unification, I would say, between all of the art sectors and being able to speak on that with other policymakers and whenever they get the opportunity to.
Yeah, I would also just echo that with community. We've heard from a lot of different creatives who are really interested in building some kind of group to advocate for the arts or the music in the public realm. But just like working together and finding different avenues to build that community and, have power with the people for advocating.
Yeah, I mean, I just would like third what they said. Working with people, like the people have the power. And it's also unfortunate because in a lot of ways the people don't have the power. And I think that kind of finding like, how do we, like what skills or like strengths do we have as a collective? Some artists or venues work with like corporations, places like the Frist, like, they can get grants. They have grant writers. How can they help smaller artists get grants in city government? Things like that where like, maybe you need advocates, in sessions, people like Jamie Kent talking about, legislative action, but then you also need kind of working with each other and figuring out like, when we don't have support, how do we support each other? So just exactly what they said.
I'm sure you touch on this a lot with like the artistpreneur type of ideology, but I would say like two things: kind of keeping your books and like speaking the same language. Like I think something that we heard in the first week that we were here is that there's a lot of opportunities, and the gap between the artist and the opportunity is the fact that you got to have like certain things, like opportunities from the city are set up for like professionals and for businesses. And if you don't have the documentation to like prove that you have this income level or prove that you've put out this many projects on so many levels of being a creative, you need to have those numbers in order to like reap the benefits of it. And the fairness of it, I'm not here to say it's how it should be or how it shouldn't, but it does take some extra work on the creative side to like make sure that you're making yourself available for as many perks as you can. And then I think with the speaking the same language, it's like the same thing with the grant writing. Like, you've got to know how policies will affect you and how they can like improve your situation. And I think that in combination with community is like, if you have a bunch of, basically my point is that you have to do what you can to make it impossible for the city to write you off as just this whimsical population of people who float around and like they don't care where their next where they're gonna go to sleep next. They don't care what their next meal is. They just want to make their art and play their guitar. Like you have to make it impossible for the city to write you off in that way. And if you have your finances and your books in order and you know how these grants and stuff or how these policies are gonna affect you, I think if everyone did that in community with each other, the government would probably be like, whoa, what's going on with all these artists that are now pressing us on financial grounds for the fact that they need this X amount of money or this policy or this amount of affordable housing units for them to stay afloat. You know what I mean?
I want to give you a standing ovation for that right now, because that is on point. Like, you have to, as an artist, especially if you want to build a career out of your art, get your business in order. I was just in Atlanta for the Forbes BLK Summit, which was an amazing educational opportunity for me. Every single person on that stage, and you're talking Jermaine Dupri, Fantasia, like heavy hitters who are like speaking on this, talked about owning your business and making sure that you have all your business in order. You know, Jermaine Dupri told a story about an artist who came up to him saying, hey, I'll pay you $10,000 to listen to my music. He's like, I'm not going to take your money to listen to your music. But then he contacted the guy and said, okay, like, I want to make something work. Who's your lawyer? The guy didn't have a lawyer, didn't have his business in order. As an artist, it is in your best interest to get all of your business, all of your systems, all of your data in order. So when that opportunity comes, when a Jermaine Dupri comes knocking on your door after you approach him at the supermarket and he decides to take a chance on you, you're ready. Because if you're not ready with all that, it's exactly like you said. Like, you're going to be caught without any answers and without any ground to stand on as a business, as a creative enterprise. Yes, I love that. So thank you.
Thanks.
Just to echo what everyone else is saying, I think community is just so important. And I would also argue that creatives need to start knowing their worth. Sorry. I think that certain people kind of depict being a starving artist as a stepping stone to making it big. And that just doesn't have to be true. I think like throughout a lot of the interviews that we've talked about, just kind of no one should be playing at a bar for free in order to get their name out there. But I would also argue that I don't think that's possible unless all the creatives of Nashville like form a community and say, we need to stop doing that. Because if someone else is willing to play for free, then
it's a race to the bottom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that like they just need to form the community, as everyone else is saying, and just realize that like the city needs them just as much as they need the city's support. And they just need to realize that.
And to echo that point, like, and somebody on YouTube is going to get at me for not understanding the free market. I understand the free market, but the downside of the free market is if you're undercharging or charging nothing, then it drives the value down for everybody else. I understand that's how it works. However, like, that's not a good thing for a robust, sustainable, creative ecosystem. We have to hold our value. We have to, first of all, understand what that is, and we have to be able to communicate that value. So it is worth it for somebody to make some kind of financial investment, whether it's somebody buying our music, whether it's somebody giving us a grant, whether it's somebody sponsoring or partnering with us. Like, there's got to be value that we communicate and that we don't waver on, so people know that we're here as a serious creative enterprise. So yes, great point. So what's next? So as of air date, July 11th, you guys are presenting So you got a couple weeks as of recording to, put your findings together and offer some solutions. But from what you're seeing right now, I know we've touched a little bit on solutions. Like, can you give us a little preview of what that looks like and maybe what happens after all of this?
We're kind of right now in the process of working on a comprehensive body of research, just from all of our interviews this summer and all of our findings that we've had. And that looks different in different avenues. We have many different solutions that we're exploring and kind of researching right now. And we're presenting them on July 11th to a number of stakeholders, and then trying to find some way to put that information in one place and hopefully be able to send that out to the community or put it out there in some way.
Yeah, it's basically we've broken up our solutions. I kind of hate that word just because there's been so many solutions in the past that have not fallen through. So all of our suggestions or findings, I think is a better way to put it, but we've broken them up into 3 different pots basically. So we have funding, affordable housing, and then kind of artists advocacy or visibility. So making sure that the value of artists is improved around Nashville. And that starts with, tourism websites, including information on where to see visual art, as well as what's the best bar on Broadway to go to see a cover band. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's where can you go to actually support these artists? And I think that alone, showing the artists that they're valued, will be helpful. And then on the affordable housing side, we've got a few different ideas. I don't necessarily feel comfortable talking specifics right now because we're still working on that. And then on the funding side, like I said, just some focus on that public avenue of government funding, and then a kind of more novel or groundbreaking focus on private funding. We've got a couple ideas for how to set up some private funding avenues that we think could be really helpful.
Yeah, and to add, I think something that's very important to us is just making sure that our body of research lives beyond our time here in Nashville. So we are trying to figure out a way to make our presentation, our research packet more accessible to everyone. But I will also concede that the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce is they did compete for us to come to Nashville so that they could receive this research. So I think that they too really want to be able to refer to what we come up with in the future and kind of point their members towards what we think could work.
And I think sometimes too, it takes outside perspective to really shine a light on what's going on. When we're all in it and we're day to day and, we're kind of accepting the current Nashville way for what it is. And this is true of wherever you live. It's hard to see the forest from the trees, but by coming in, shining a light on hey, this is what's happening here. Here are the opportunities for growth. What you're doing, the work that you're doing, has a real chance to make our city and our creative ecosystem better. And I think I speak on behalf of every creative in Nashville when I say thank you for that, because we need that. This could lead to a new renaissance for creatives in this city where people making original art in any medium are heard and seen and appreciated for what they do and are able to find ways to be compensated for that, because ultimately that's what makes things go around, right? Is you have to be able to make money and make a living off of what you do in order to do it at the highest level. And so by shining a light, that's giving us all the opportunity as the creative class here in Nashville to have that. And it's also potentially reframing how people see Nashville, not only within the city, but outside. Are we just the place where you go hear cover bands on Broadway? And no shade to the cover bands. A lot of those folks, super, super talented.
Yeah, I want to say that too.
Yeah, no shade. And a lot of those people have their own projects and that's how they make their living, right? But are we just a place where that happens and tourists come in, get trashed and go home? Or are we a place where there's a vibrant culture, where there's art of any medium, of any genre being created? And how do we support that art and how do we grow Nashville into a world superpower across the arts and creative landscape? So thank you for your work on this project. I think it's super important to all of us. So
thanks. I think one thing too that I wanted to kind of get out there is that our body of work is the type of work that at the very least it's gonna add a big exclamation mark to the end of all the voices that have already been kind of lifted up and have gotten out there. So at the very least, if when we're talking about our work living on, like at the very least, we're gonna join in with those other voices and just add kind of fuel to the fire, an outside voice, a young voice of people who feel the same way as all the people that have already been advocating in the city. And then we also have like ideas to make it live on as large as like forming nonprofit, forming like charity groups, advocacy groups. So we're kind of leaving it in the hands of the stakeholders that hear the ideas. But we know that at the very least, like if nothing else from our solutions get through, it can be said that a exterior group of researchers came to Nashville and saw the same problems as the artists here on the ground. So I think that in itself is important. And then if we're really like talking about the best possible outcome, we've got a lasting infrastructure to like put all of these ideas into place.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you for giving us the opportunity to be able to talk about this. We talked about this earlier. Nashville has been so welcoming, and the last thing we wanted to do is be these 5 college students from North Carolina coming into Nashville and telling everybody what you need to do or how to fix the problem. We're still learning every single day about the culture here and ways in which people want to be helped and want to be supported. But thank you for these opportunities, and we really hope to bring more to the table with that and kind of be extra voices on top of what has already been done for that.
Absolutely. Well, pleasure's all mine. Thank you for coming on the show. Now, one more question before we sign off. Well, 2 more questions, but the first one's going to be fun. We'll go down the line. We'll start here, work down. Your favorite thing about Nashville and your time here?
I will say probably not the answer any local Tennessee or Nashvillean would prefer, but I really enjoyed CMA Fest.
Okay.
It was a really good time.
Okay. It looked like a good time. I didn't go, but it looked like a good time.
I think probably the food. Nobody until you show up here says like, oh, it's a total like foodie city.
But
then
is.
when you get here, everyone's like, this is a total foodie city. So I think it's like once you get here, you realize it. But I've absolutely loved it. It's great.
Yeah.
We're living in East Nashville too, and there's so many good restaurants over there. So yeah, it's been awesome.
Yeah, maybe this is an answer locals may not also say, but kind of proximity. I'm from Atlanta, and it takes like an hour and a half to get from like the top of the city to the bottom. But in Nashville, I feel like it takes like 30 minutes. You know, I know that traffic is like increasingly becoming a problem, but compared to like where I'm from, it feels like there's like no traffic. And so it's been nice to say like, oh, do you want to just drive into downtown? And you just drive to downtown.
Yeah, that's great.
But food would have been my number 1, but I can't take that from Benji. So number 2 is proximity.
I think I would say the people. Yeah, Nashville it's a city, but it also has a lot of Southern hospitality. And I don't know, it's a very unique place in that it has a little bit of both. And the people are really welcoming, as we've talked about throughout this podcast episode. But yeah, the people have been really great, and I've really enjoyed it a lot.
Chandler, you stole my idea. I was going to say kind of the opportunities that you have in Nashville. We have done 1,000 side quests outside of just researching. I mean, we got to do a Habitat for Humanity build. Like, we get to volunteer at the Downtown Presbyterian Church, feeding the homeless. Like, we have had so many opportunities to get to know Nashville, or Nashvillians.
Yep.
So I think that has been so much fun, getting to know people's stories. People are so open to share their stories and want to like tell you about those things, and especially when you're new to Nashville. So I think everyone wants you to fall in love with Nashville, and I definitely have.
Well, we're glad to have you here, and even after your time's done, we hope you'll come back and visit us. Where can we learn more about Morehead-Cain and the work that you're doing?
So Morehead-Cain, we have a website, part of the Scholarship Foundation as a whole with UNC kind of. But learning more about our research, we're hoping to create that comprehensive packet of research and solutions findings, and we'll be aiming to just send them out to the stakeholders, but also we're looking into different avenues as to how we can put that out there even more, whether that be through the chamber or through another website
Like
or
on a
another
website.
venue.
Mhm.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we're working through those things, but we definitely want to make sure it's available to anyone who wants to learn about those things.
So
We're
stay
also-
tuned. Yeah.
We're also hoping it's kind of one of those things. We've had a couple interviews where we're like, yeah, we've been looking into this, and someone's like, oh, I saw there's this really good study going around
Mhm.
about that we'll send your way or whatever. So we're hoping it can have kind of a similar effect.
Mhm.
The people that we have in the room that will or the people that we've interviewed, everyone that we've interviewed will receive a copy of it, and then we're hoping that from there it's kind of like, you need to see this, because we're hoping that it's something that everyone needs to see. That's how good we want it to be. And then Morehead-Cain Instagram, website, you just look it up and see anything. Yeah.
Well, if this conversation's any indication, it will be a must-see. Thank you all again for joining. And this has been the Quinn Spin. 2 N's in Quinn, 2 N's in Spin. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and more. Also on the socials at Quinn Spin Official on Instagram and Threads, The Quinn Spin on Facebook and TikTok. UMCNashville.com is our central hub for all things independent creativity, community, music, and more. Of course, you can find us on the socials, most of them anyway, at UMC Nashville, except Facebook. It's UMC Worldwide. Long story, whatever. At UMC Academy on Instagram as well for more educational content. We're going to be ramping up. At Nash Live shows, we have a Nash Live experience on this very stage, July 20th, the Sonic Kaleidoscope featuring Shawnee Rain, Fiona Mara, and Hugh G. Tickets are available now at Nash Live shows on Instagram. Real Nine's all become. Going to take us out like it brought us in. Grab some muffins on the way out.